Jeff Hardy is one of those wrestlers who's so beloved by the fans that he never needs to play the bad guy. To start with, he has that unique charisma, and then there's the sacrifices that he's made to his own body and the pain that he's put himself through over the years for our entertainment. And despite all of his personal demons, he seems to be one of the good guys in life, not just in the wrestling ring. In fact, he's rarely been a heel in his entire 30-year career. But there was one time at the end of 2010 where he turned to the dark side. Jeff's road to TNA had been a bumpy one. He was a one-time European champion, a three-time hardcore champion, a one-time intercontinental champion, and of course, a six-time tag team champion alongside his brother Matt. Fans who were watching during the Attitude Era will remember just how incredible those first ladder tag team matches and TLC matches were. All of the men in those matches became legends, but with Jeff, there was something extra special about him. He went above and beyond with the risks that he took every single time he stepped into one of those matches, and fans didn't just respect him, they started to love him. But all was not well behind the scenes. Jeff was becoming erratic, missing scheduled shows. He was reportedly struggling with substance abuse issues, which impacted his in-ring performance. Most wrestlers never get as many chances as Jeff did to come clean. Jim Ross has spoken about how firing Jeff in 2003 was one of the hardest decisions he ever had to make. But when Jeff refused to go to rehab, that was the final straw. WWE cut Jeff loose in April 2003. He debuted in TNA for the first time in 2004, where he got a new nickname that suited him perfectly: the charismatic Enigma. Jeff was treated like a big deal in TNA. He went right in at the main event level and had some entertaining feuds and matches, but he still hadn't fully addressed his personal issues. TNA ended up suspending Jeff for no-showing events, including a major pay-per-view match against Raven in May 2005. By June 2006, they were at the end of their rope with him, and they decided to fire him. But as always, the charismatic Enigma landed on his feet, and WWE almost immediately re-signed him to a contract. And this would be the greatest run of his entire career. It was fantastic. He won the WWE Championship once and the World Heavyweight Championship twice, and had some incredible feuds with the likes of Edge, Triple H, and most notably, CM Punk. That feud with Punk got seriously close to reality as they brought Jeff's real-life addiction issues into the storyline for the first time. Jeff's connection with the fans reached an unprecedented level during this time. His underdog persona and willingness to take risks made him one of the most beloved main eventers in WWE history. But this run wasn't without its problems. In March 2008, Jeff was suspended for 60 days due to a positive wellness test. He was scheduled to win the Money in the Bank contract at WrestleMania 24, but that ended up going to CM Punk instead. Jeff decided to leave the company in August 2009. He left on his own terms, deciding to not renew his contract. It seemed that his split from WWE was a license to let loose in his personal life, because it was just a month after leaving before he got arrested for multiple drugs charges. He was sentenced to 10 days in jail, he got 30 months of probation and a fine of $100,000. It looked like a future return to WWE was completely off the table. TNA, on the other hand, was the Wild West in comparison to WWE. They were far more lax when it came to testing for drugs, and they were hungry to sign real superstars to their roster. They already had the likes of Kurt Angle, Mick Foley, Kevin Nash, Sting, Scott Steiner and Hulk Hogan under contract, and some really felt that TNA could become a serious contender to WWE, including new executive producer Eric Bischoff, who had visions of finishing the job that he'd started in WCW. Which brings us to January of 2010 and TNA's first ever live Monday episode of Impact. This episode of Impact went head to head with WWE Raw for the first time in preparation for a new Monday Night War. This was a dumb decision and a subject that, quite frankly, requires its own video, but in fairness, this debut episode of Monday Night Impact did provide some huge moments for TNA, including the return of the charismatic Enigma. Jeff had a good start in the company, soon defeating world champion AJ Styles in a non-title match, but it wasn't long before he got lost in the mix as TNA descended into an overcrowded, overbooked mess. He ended up feuding with Mr. Anderson of all people, before siding with him in a tag team called the Enigmatic Assholes. But up until the middle of the year, it felt like TNA were wasting Jeff's star potential as he just treaded water. But then the World Heavyweight title became vacated. After a convoluted tournament, Jeff ended up in a three-way dance to crown a new champion. This was the main event of Bound for Glory in October 2010, and it would be a major turning point for Jeff Hardy as a character. Hardy turned heel. This led to Jeff winning the World Championship and revealing himself as the new leader of the Immortal faction at the end of the show. Despite being a ring veteran by this point, Jeff had to learn a whole new way of wrestling. He'd only briefly played a heel before, so this was all brand new to him. Behind the scenes, he turned to Scott Levy, also known as Raven. Levy had been one of the most effective bad guys in all of ECW during the 90s, and he coached Jeff on how to shed his babyface ways. One of Jeff's biggest weaknesses throughout his career had been his promo work. He just wasn't a very strong speaker, but as a babyface, he didn't really need to be. He was already super over and his in-ring work spoke for itself. But as we all know, being a heel is a totally different ballgame. But for the most part, it kind of worked. His backstage promos were really effective. He'd obviously paid close attention to Scott Levy's advice, and I think he did a really good job here of putting across his new bad guy persona. He also debuted new entrance music, which I think was really effective, and his new look suited this depressive, moody version of Jeff, with the new face paint, the haircut and the dark coat, all adding to his character fantastically. But if reports from the time are to be believed, then Jeff was still having a really hard time personally during this period. It seemed that he was tapping into his personal problems here and using that experience to shape his heel character. On screen, Jeff's reasons for turning heel all made sense. He said that he felt betrayed and unappreciated by the fans who never truly valued the sacrifices that he'd made for them. Despite giving his body to entertain the audience, Jeff believed that he wasn't given the respect that he deserved, and siding with Hogan and Bischoff was his way of getting the recognition he felt he was long overdue. Jeff also modified his in-ring work. He adopted a slower, more methodical pace. He also renamed his finish from the Twist of Fate to the Twist of Hate, but I do think he would have benefited from debuting a brand new finisher rather than just changing the name of his old one. And I have to admit, I thought his version of the TNA World title was ugly as hell, but perhaps that was the intention. Unfortunately, his reign as champion was pretty weak. He defended the belt against the likes of Matt Morgan and Mr. Anderson, who even by TNA standards were poor choices as main event babyfaces. Maybe this heel run for Jeff would have been better remembered if he had a decent feud against somebody. A lot of the problems with Jeff's championship reign was down to the booking, but he wasn't completely innocent either. Jeff was arriving backstage at the Impact Zone looking tired and hungover. He defended the title in Japan, and it was clear that Jeff was drunk during the match as he messed up spot after spot. He also defended the belt against Matt Morgan on pay-per-view in one of the worst TNA main events ever. In a backstage meeting with officials, Jeff managed to convince them that he was just tired from all of the travelling, and they decided to believe him. As good as he was at playing the Antichrist, it was clear that his personal problems were seeping back into his professional life. Perhaps those dark, depressing, angry promos were so convincing because there was a lot of truth to them. As Jeff feuded with his one-time tag team partner, Mr. Anderson, some of the fans started to cheer for him again, and this once again comes back to TNA's bad booking. Anderson has always been a natural heel, but they insisted on pushing him as the company's #1 babyface at the time. Eventually, Jeff got into a feud with Sting, who returned to the company in February 2011. Sting beat Jeff for the world title on an episode of Impact, which led to a rematch at Victory Road in March. And this is where the Antichrist of Wrestling came to a crashing end. As Jeff headed to the ring, it became clear that he was absolutely hammered. Eric Bischoff got to the ring before the match started and improvised an announcement, declaring the contest to be no disqualification. He was then seen to speak privately with both Sting and Jeff in order to tell them to wrap it up quickly. Once the bell rang, Sting hit the Scorpion Death Drop before forcefully holding Jeff down for the 3 count. The match lasted for just 88 seconds. As Sting was declared the new World Heavyweight Champion, fans started chanting bullshit at him. Sting was visibly frustrated by the situation too, as he shouted to the crowd that he agreed with the sentiment. TNA suspended Jeff indefinitely, sending him home to try and address his personal problems. The incident marked the end of the Antichrist character and led to a redemption storyline when he returned later in the year. In a promo filled with emotion, he admitted his mistakes and asked the fans for forgiveness. While this heel persona was interesting for a few months, I think that Jeff should stay forever as a babyface in the ring. His personal life is clearly dark enough.